Let us talk about Jeremiah. In all the prophets in the Bible, and I don't mean all the prophets, but all the books written by prophets. So, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, all the lesser prophets. Of all these men, we know more about Jeremiah than anybody else. There's some speculation in there as well. So we have a lot of information about this guy. I mean, we knew quite a bit about Isaiah, but we know more about Jeremiah. Because in the book of Jeremiah, in his own record, he records his own history to a certain extent. He tells us a lot of what happens in his life. So let us consider. Jeremiah was born in the village of Anathoth. This is about 3-4 miles north of Jerusalem. Now, Anathoth is in the land of Benjamin. Now, you might recall when we were reading back in Joshua and they divided the land among the tribes, the city of Jerusalem was originally part of the tribe of Benjamin. But Bethlehem was in Judah. That was their dividing line, was between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. So Anathoth is a Benjamite city. But we are told that it is now a city where the priests live. It's a family of priests living in Anathoth. And Jeremiah is among these. He is of this family. This was a very well-connected family, very prestigious family, very well known. And he is a younger member of this family. Now it says his father is Hilkiah. We also read that when Josiah ordered the repairing of the temple, it was Hilkiah the high priest that found the lost book, which we will read about a little bit later. But Hilkiah is the high priest, Jeremiah is the son of Hilkiah. I actually don't think they're the same man. I think there's two different Hilkiahs here. It doesn't say in Jeremiah that he is the son of Hilkiah the high priest, or an high priest. It just says the son of Hilkiah, who was of the priests of Anathoth. So the family in Anathoth, they're a family of priests, but it doesn't seem to have the high priest in them. But then Jeremiah is called as a prophet. Now I mentioned in my introduction to Zephaniah that Zephaniah probably precedes Jeremiah by a few years, and likely, in my opinion, that Zephaniah was kind of a mentor to Jeremiah in his early years as a prophet. He comes to Jerusalem kind of like Elisha to Elijah. Elisha was his companion while Elijah taught Elisha the ropes, kind of showed him what he was doing. And in the same sense, we get Zephaniah and Jeremiah. But then Zephaniah probably dies, and Jeremiah emerges as the main prophet in Jerusalem. And for the next 40 years, he's almost the only true prophet in Jerusalem, and probably in the rest of the nation of Judea. The only other one I can think of that prophesied before the Babylonian captivity is Habakkuk, and we're not even exactly sure when he prophesied. And well, possibly Obadiah, but we'll get to them later. So he's almost by himself. Although I have to correct that statement, because near the end, you do have Lehi came on the scene very briefly. Lehi and Jeremiah are contemporary. But Lehi is called to be a prophet and in the first year of the reign of Zedekiah. That is like about 30 years after Jeremiah was called to be a prophet. So Jeremiah has been the prophet of Jerusalem for about 30 years when Lehi comes on the scene as a prophet, when Lehi is called as a prophet. A couple of things about Jeremiah, just some speculations that people have kind of tossed out there on his personality. That Jeremiah kind of presents himself as being somewhat shy, reserved kind of person. He doesn't like confrontation. He doesn't want to be out there declaring the words of God, really. He wants to stay at home, kick up his feet, maybe read a book. And when God first calls him, he even says, I can't go, I'm too young. Which indicates to me that he was probably in his 20s when he's called to be a prophet. When he was first sent out there, he's probably in his mid-20s, around 25, somewhere in that area. Now he will prophesy, he will be the prophet for a little over 40 years, which means he will die probably in his late 60s. But he's a young man when he is called and he is sent there, and he is a reserved man. He is well-read. He seems to be well-read. He seems to be a literate, well-read man, likely studied in as they said, the speculation, he studied in the scribal school that was overseen by Shaphan, who was the court scribe. So he probably was an educated man. But he was a young man, reserved, didn't like getting out in the public, but God called him to be a prophet, and he was a faithful man, so he went out and he did what God told him to do. He was also a great patriot, and he loved his country, but he hated what was happening. And we see this throughout Jeremiah and even the book of Lamentations, which is most likely, we'll talk about Lamentations later, but you can see it that he is weeping over his people. God is telling him these people are going to be destroyed. They're going to be taken captive into a foreign land, scattered among the heathens. And Jeremiah is his heart is broken over this, and he strives so hard to get the people to repent. He knows it's hopeless, but he can't give up because he loves his people. He loves his country. And he is persecuted for it. Not only does the king turn against multiple kings, he actually prophesying during the reign of 5 different kings, but they all hate him except Josiah. Josiah loved Jeremiah as far as we can tell. Josiah was a great guy and Jeremiah was a great prophet, so they probably got along. But after Josiah, the next 4 kings all hated Jeremiah. They persecuted him. They burnt his writings when he wrote down his visions and his prophecies. They would destroy the record. They threw him into prisons. They threw him into mud pits so that he would slowly starve. God always rescued him, but he was persecuted. The high priests at the temple hated him, and his own family in Anathoth sought to kill him. Now, near the end of his life, he actually tells Zedekiah and others, just submit to Babylon. The time's over for independence. God has said you don't get independence. So if you submit to the will of Babylon, you'll be safe. Just serve Babylon. They rebel against Babylon, and we get the destruction of Jerusalem. At which point, Babylon appoints a governor, I think it's Gedaliah by name, and they actually like Jeremiah. Babylon loves Jeremiah. They say, hey, you're a great guy. You want to come to Babylon and live? We'll give you a house. You want to stay here? We'll give you a house here too. And Jeremiah chooses to go with Gedaliah to live in the town of Mizpah in Benjamin. But Gedaliah is then assassinated, and his assassins, in order to avoid the retribution of Babylon, flee into Egypt. But they take Jeremiah, they take him by force, carry him into Babylon, because they view him as their as a religious fetish, where if we have him, God will protect us. We will be protected by God. And Jeremiah tells me, you're not going to be protected. God's already condemned you. If you stay here, if you stay here and submit to Babylon, you'll be okay. You try to flee, then it's over for you. But they take him into Egypt anyways, and shortly thereafter, according to tradition, they get mad at him because he keeps chastising them, and eventually stone him to death in their anger. And that is the life of Jeremiah. So, kind of a tragic life. He was in a time where he knew he couldn't stop the destruction that was coming, but he still did everything he could. He reminds me a lot of Mormon in the Book of Mormon, actually, where Mormon is at the last days of the Nephite nation, and he is willing to lead them because he loves the people so much. He loves his country. He is a true patriot, but he knows that there is no hope. And Jeremiah is the same way, the true patriot who is doing everything he can to preserve his people, knowing that there is no hope. This is why some have termed him the weeping prophet, because he is, throughout his writing, it is a fairly constant theme of him lamenting and mourning over the people. He even at one time wishes that he could cry more, that he had more tears to shed, because his sorrow was so great. Now, just a couple other minor details that I found interesting. There is some speculation that Jeremiah is the author of 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. Now, these are the 4 books of the Kings in the Septuagint, in the Hebrew Bible. So it is thought that Jeremiah may be the author of those books, which makes sense in that they end with, at the same time that Jeremiah is carried into Egypt by the renegade Jews. That's when the narrative in the Kings ends. There is a small, like 3 or 4 verse epilogue tacked onto the end, but it basically ends at the same time that Jeremiah is taken out of Jerusalem. So it kind of makes sense. There's also speculation that Jeremiah, well, there's two speculations here. Either Jeremiah was unmarried, and he never got married, which I doubt. Now, there is some reference in the book of Jeremiah that kind of hints at this, but he was a prophet of God. He knew the gospel. He would have gotten married. So I think that what's in the book of Jeremiah is metaphorical. But the other thing that I find interesting is the idea that the prophet Ezekiel is actually the son of Jeremiah. Now, of course, in the book of Ezekiel, it calls him the son of Bazai or something like that. So it's a theory. I don't think it's really true, but I find it interesting that the connection is being made there. But this is Jeremiah, the most tragic prophet of the Old Testament, the greatest patriot since Joshua. Joshua saw his people conquer the land and establish themselves as God's people. And on the other end, Jeremiah watches them fall and can do nothing about it. So let us read the words of the weeping prophet.
It's a poor legacy, but it's all I have.